Well, good evening and welcome into this Facebook Live edition of Meet the Candidates. My name's Chris. I guess you don't have to say that because we're on Facebook and you can read it. The gentleman next to me is another candidate you have maybe met and heard on the show. Certainly, if you've listened to the show before, you have heard him anyway. If you haven't met him yet, he's been crisscrossing the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania because he'd like your vote as the Republican nominee to be the next governor of Pennsylvania. He's Guy Ciarrocchi, former president and CEO of the Chester County Chamber of Business and Industry. And full disclosure, an old friend of mine. Mr. Ciarrocchi, welcome to the show, sir.
Good evening and greetings. As I describe it for those who follow me on social media, greetings from the Orange Room, where all of my Zoom and Facebook broadcasts take place.
We are encouraging people tonight. You know, this is not a conversation between Guy and me. This is a conversation, I hope, between you and Guy. I will simply facilitate. So if you have a question for Guy, type it right in here, and Fast Eddie's going to throw it up on the screen, and we'll get to them in the order we receive them. And all right, we'll just take as many as we can while we can. And you know, Guy, the last time you and I visited, it's funny. I don't get this a lot, but somebody did say, "Hey, well, if Guy's your friend, then does that mean you're pulling for him? Does that mean the fix is in? You've got a candidate?" I said, "Well, look, I've said this before. This is not exactly a ringing endorsement. Pennsylvania could do a lot worse and does presently than Guy Ciarrocchi. So not something you'd put on a bumper sticker, but not for nothing. I have worked closely with you over the last year. You were intimately involved in what was the lockdown and shutdown of many Pennsylvania businesses, certainly in the Southeast. And you and I got to know one another on the fundamentally and transformative bill in Pennsylvania to amend the Constitution on the emergency order. I mean, you and I worked together a lot. We've been friends before that, but when it comes to COVID, which I have been clear is the most important thing to me, it just is as an issue. I don't know how else to say it. Of the people that I know that are running, no one has done more on that issue than you.
That's better. See, now you got it. Now we're getting closer to a bumper sticker. So, yeah, we did because look, these were very, very different last 2 years. And you had a bully pulpit, and you made sure that people not only understood what was going on, but that there were others going through it too. And for their fear, anxiety, and frustration, there was an outlet. And when it came time to be involved in Vote Yes to try and change our Constitution, you used your bully pulpit, you used your broadcast to both bring people together and then to give them an outlet to channel. And I was glad to be a part of it. It was not something that you would have sat down a year ahead of time and designed your programming. It was not something that we would have sat down in my chamber and said, "Hey, how about if we work on a constitutional amendment?" It became an action of necessity because of what happened, which things that we could have never imagined. If you and I had sat down 5 years ago and said, "Can you imagine a time where no one's allowed to go to work? Could you imagine a time where kids are told not to hug their grandparents?" You and I would have thought we were making up some sort of spy novel or fiction. So you and I did get to know each other. And those of us who rolled up our sleeves and took our frustration, took our anger, and channeled it in a positive way, did work in the trenches. And despite the fact that the governor was opposed to us, the governor used his media, the attorney general used his media, and many legislators actually tried to campaign to tell us that we didn't want power, that we didn't want control over our lives. We managed to prevail, and I'm proud of that.
And I'll just say, at that time, I never knew that you had any inkling or thought of running for governor. And I don't know when you formally made that decision, but if it was during that time, you never indicated that to me. When did you finally decide I need to run for governor?
It was an evolution that started in the late spring of 2021. As I began to become more involved on your show and others, and began to speak out in the media and began to be invited to speak at events, people were asking if I would, why won't I take that message further about reopening and getting our liberty back? And then, frankly, we were successful. And then a lot of people said, "Now what?" But then what happened is I actually went to a conference in Harrisburg, or actually just outside in Camp Hill. Don't want to forget our dear friends in Cumberland County, just on the other side of the river. And I was at a conference and saw a number of the folks running for governor, and not to disparage them at all. But I heard probably 7 of them speak, and almost none of them made reference to the mandates other than saying things like we've got to get rid of King Tom. But it wasn't really a discussion about the state of small business or the state of schools on where kids were. And the kids were still locked out largely in the Delaware Valley. And I came home and called my dear friend Jim Cawley, our former lieutenant governor, my friend of 30 years. And I said, we're going to lose, because if we don't tap into and understand what people still feel, our party's going to lose. And we should lose, because if we're not talking about what people think it was. So I didn't really reach that tipping point until June of 2021, and spent the summer doing due diligence to then launch in September on your show.
If you have a question for Guy, come on in here, please. And I saw one already up there from Gail. I guess we could just jump off there, because I actually have a stack of things in front of me that I wanted to run by you. But if you have questions for Guy, this is your interview, not mine. So, Gail, we start with you. As governor, would you cancel Act 77? While I say that COVID is the most important thing to me, and the way Tom Wolf and Democrats have run this state as far as COVID is concerned, I would put as a close second, and it is a nip and tuck, neck and neck race. Gail obviously has typified that in Act 77, and that is the no excuse mail-in balloting that was passed, sadly, we know, by the Republican legislature. There are 3 people running for governor who were part of passing that, incidentally, not for nothing. And the voters, at least in this primary, are paying close attention to that guy. So what do you think of Act 77? What do you think of people that are running who helped pass it? And would you repeal it if you were governor?
Sure. So lots to unpack there. Let's start, as has now been what is legendary. I begin by saying I grew up in South Philly and began my first 11 elections working at the polls in South Philly. You do not have to work very hard to convince me to tell me that the Democrats cheat at elections. I watched it firsthand and fought against it as a volunteer back in the 80s and 90s. Act 77 needs to be replaced. The Commonwealth Court has just said it's unconstitutional. It now goes to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. I trust the Pennsylvania Supreme Court as far as I can throw the Capitol building. So I think the odds of their ruling it invalid are not high. So we are going to have to replace it, and we should replace it. And I approach this with 3 principles. It should be easy to vote, impossible to cheat, and we should have results that we can trust. And if we have drop boxes, there's no trust. If we have no excuse voting that begins in September, that makes a farce of elections. The idea that you can sign up for mail-in ballots today and say that you would like to get a mail-in ballot for the rest of your life, you're allowed to do that. It's like signing up for coupons on Bed Bath & Beyond, but it's far more serious than that. The idea that the Department of State in Harrisburg would instruct my local election board to send a ballot to me at my present address forever is ludicrous. That we're going to send that to apartment buildings with 200 units where we know that sometimes the mail is stacked up on the radiator because it can't fit in, and we're just going to leave ballots sit there. It's ridiculous. So look, Act 77 needs to be replaced. We need to get rid of drop boxes. You should have to request an absentee or mail-in ballot. We need voter ID. I remind people, this will be the 100th time that I will remind people that voter ID is not a Republican or a conservative idea. No one other than St. Jimmy Carter, the former president and world ambassador for voting, has said that voter ID is a critical part to having results that you can trust. We need voter ID. We need to clean up the voter rolls. I will fight tirelessly to make sure that every citizen gets 1 vote. I will fight just as tirelessly to make sure that every citizen gets no more than 1 vote. No ballot harvesting, no bundling. Everybody gets 1 vote. Anything that causes us to question the validity of an election needs to be fixed and addressed. Act 77's failed. It needs to be replaced. And I remind our Democratic friends, I seem to have a vague recollection that they did not like the results in 2016 and didn't think they were accurate. And we heard for it for 4 years. So let's work together, fix it, and give us results we can all trust.
Do you think it's disqualifying that you would have been a part of passing Act 77 and now run for higher office today?
I think you have a lot of explaining to do. I wouldn't tell any of your listeners that anybody's disqualified. I would tell them that I'm the best candidate and the only guy for the job. But in all seriousness, I think it's for you to decide. I think that they need to explain what they did and why. And I think just as importantly, they need to explain what they did, what they said, once it became clear in the fall of 2020, when the Supreme Court started changing election dates, when the Secretary of State started changing election dates and created drop boxes. Where was their outrage? Where was their attempt to bring attention to it, to bring the national spotlight to it? The Supreme Court and the Secretary of State changed our laws upside down and backwards, creating drop boxes, extending dates, waiving the signature requirement for ballots. I want to know not only one, why did you vote for 77, but two, what did you do to stop the madness that was unfolding in front of us in October and November of 2020? Because we watched the law become bastardized right in front of our eyes, and I want to know where their outrage was and what they were doing to change it then.
If you have a question for Guy and you're just tuning in and you're watching, go ahead and fire away and we'll slap it up here on the screen and ask it. Jennifer wants to know, as governor, we saw Murphy today announce, and other Democrat governors, we saw Youngkin down in Virginia, of course, most famously, begin to end mandates, mask mandates. I don't know about vaccine mandates. I'm not sure. Masks were a much more mandated thing than the shots were, certainly for schools. Schools are still going to be able to uphold them, though. And so as governor, this is interesting because there seems to be a split amongst Republicans, Guy, a philosophical one. And you and I, over the years as friends, have talked about philosophical issues related to governance and Republican and conservative principles. And some Republicans would say, I'm against mandates, but I'm not going to tell a school district what they should do, or a county what they should do, or a city what they should do. Guys like DeSantis did. They said there will not be mandates. In Missouri, you have the attorney general who is suing every school district in the state that tries to implement a mask mandate. He's basing that on a judicial ruling, but he's the top law enforcement official in Missouri, and he's suing individual entities for mandating masks. So where would Guy Ciarrocchi, governor, come down on the issue of mandates and then allowing or not allowing individual entities like school boards and counties to mandate?
Yeah. Look, Chris, I have to tell you at the beginning, I'm a parent, but as your listeners and folks following the campaign know, I've been a little league softball coach, a girls softball coach for 23 years. And I viewed this lockdown not only through my eyes and my kids, but as the coach of what were then 10-year-olds that are now 12-year-olds. What government has done to our kids is nothing short of criminal. Keeping them out of school and then forcing them to wear masks has been nothing short of criminal. So where would I go having seen this? And I would just share this anecdote. I toured my old grade school. I went to St. Monica's in South Philadelphia. And I toured my old school about a month ago. And the principal there reminded me of two things at the end of my tour. One is that the kindergartner, first and second graders had never been to school without having masks on, had never really seen their teacher's face, had never really experienced each other's emotions outside of lunchtime. And she thought that that was damaging as an educator and just a human being with compassion. And the second she shared is that she was very uncomfortable as the principal, as the CEO, the idea that the federal government or the state government would ever make her fire the teachers or the staff or the custodians at that school because they didn't comply with a mandate for masks or vaccines, after those very people were the heroes of 2020 and 2021. And she wasn't being political. She wasn't running for governor. She wasn't running for Congress. She was speaking with her heart and saying that. So where do I go? One is I would never, ever impose mandates, and I would not allow government to impose mandates. The state would not have any mandates. I would allow private businesses to decide as long as they complied with the law, meaning that there were exemptions for religion and other health conditions. But I would never allow the government to comply. The only thing that I have said that I would allow is that if a local school board wanted to do it, they would have to appeal to our Department of Health and our Department of Education and explain why they needed an exception. They would have to show me extraordinary reasons. But there would be effectively in Pennsylvania a statewide ban. The only window that I would allow is I would allow a local school district to ask for permission, and they would have to get that clearance from the Department of Education and Department of Health. Otherwise, no. There is no reason today, as we sit here in February of 2022, that these children are required to wear masks. Mom or dad want a mask, that's fine. Child wears a mask. If there's a special situation in a class, again, there was a time, Chris, was people, we talked about these things. If there's a young boy or a young girl in your child's classroom that is recovering from cancer or has some other ailment, and as a class, the parents decide they want to help Jimmy or Susie, that should be handled on a human parent to parent level. But mandates, it is the whole reason I'm running. I'm absolutely sick of it. I never want to hear the word again.
Keep your questions coming for Guy, and Karen has one. I mean, Eddie, hold this question for Karen for a minute because, and I want to come back to it. But while we're on school boards, I'm just going to throw it in. It may come up again. There was something interesting going on, and I asked it last week of Lou Barletta. I'll ask it of you again. I know this isn't happening in Pennsylvania, but I wonder if it could gain traction. What about the notion of making school board elections partisan? That is to say, candidates on a school board ballot, we know what their political affiliation is, and perhaps tying school board elections to general elections. Third, perhaps allowing for school boards and school board members to be recalled. I don't know what the law is in Pennsylvania on that. I would guess it's very similar to, and I'm citing actually Missouri, which is my original state, my home state. That's exactly what they're proposing right now in the legislature: the ability to recall school board members, the ability to declare their partisan affiliation, and then tie their elections to the general instead of this kind of special spring thing. What do you think conceptually of holding school boards more accountable that way?
Yeah, so in Pennsylvania, you run by party. The only difference is you're allowed to run in both parties. So you're allowed to what we do say cross file, and um, that happens in other races. I mean, there are communities in Pennsylvania where one party is so dominant that a state house member will run as a Republican and run as a write-in as a Democrat, and vice versa. Um, I'm not opposed to that. In other words, if the residents of Downingtown know that Joe Blow is a Republican, but the Democrats like Joe Blow and they want to write him in as their nominee, so be it. I don't want to tell folks that they can't write in someone. I'm not a fan of recall because I believe it, particularly at a local level, becomes disruptive. Um, the terms are only 4 years. The folks don't get paid. If a year into this we're recalling people at the local level, the school board level, I think it's disruptive. However, in terms of accountability, there are a lot we can do. One is this notion that the FBI is coming to your local school board meeting if you speak up. I have said publicly and written on social media and in columns. If I were governor, the FBI is not coming to any school board meeting in Pennsylvania. We do not need the federal government yelling at mom because she's upset about mask mandates. The second thing is this, and you may know, but I'm not sure all your listeners do. There was a bill in Pennsylvania on transparency so that the curriculum and textbooks used would be available online to parents and taxpayers. Governor Wolf vetoed it, said it would cause disruption and hatred. So let's just pause for a second. The idea, the idea that a local school board would ask teachers to print or publish the syllabus, the curriculum, and the textbook is something that parents and taxpayers should not have easy access to because you don't know what that might lead to. So, in terms of accountability and transparency, Governor Ciarrocchi will not only sign for it, I'll campaign for it, I'll go door to door for it. We're going to publicize in Pennsylvania. I will ask the legislature to give me a legislation to mandate that that information's done. I think what you're hearing from your listeners, Chris, is what I'm hearing around the state. They woke up one day and realized school boards just weren't about property taxes. They determined who could go to school and who couldn't, and they're upset about the curriculum, and even more upsetting, they were told they weren't allowed what was going on. You and I know the stories. Mom was told to sit down and be quiet and stop watching Fox News. And I always laugh because in my neighborhood, a lot of moms don't watch Fox News, and told school boards that. School boards uh, school boards need to be accountable. So I know the frustration, but our elections are partisan. You can cross file. I don't want to tell Democrats they can't vote for a Republican or Republicans they can't vote for Democrats. I'm not a fan of recall, but I'm a huge fan of transparency and accountability. And the FBI is not coming to Pennsylvania when you try to hold somebody accountable.
Final question on the school board front. Maybe it'll come up in future questions, and then I will get to Karen's question here, I promise, and others. Keep your questions coming, by the way, and we'll put them up here on the screen. In Oxford, Pennsylvania, Chester County, that you know well, there is a school board member. She was just newly elected, I believe, back in November. We talked about her on my show. In fact, I've corresponded with her. We're looking to maybe get in touch with her. A lot of attention being paid to this woman because she dared raise the issue of when we talk about undereducated kids or kids that aren't performing well and our test scores are very, very low, and we're talking about poverty within our district, how many of these kids are illegal, are children of illegal migrants? And as the reporting in the Inquirer reads, apparently there is a law on the books. I don't know if it's a Commonwealth law, if it's a federal law, maybe both, where the school board admonished her quickly, the president did, and said, no, we're not allowed to talk about that here. And her point was, well, shouldn't it matter if our test scores are low and we're talking about poverty rates? If we're talking about people that just arrived here from Guatemala and were dropped here in Oxford and they don't speak English, that accounts for lower test scores, bringing everybody in the community down economically and in performance. I don't know to what level that's happening in Oxford, but you know as well as I do, across the Commonwealth, in rural communities in particular, we're seeing this influx of illegal migrants being dropped in these communities. And this woman on the Oxford School Board, newly elected, she's a Penn State chemistry grad. I mean, she's no dummy, and she's raising this issue, and everybody said, "Oh, we're not to talk about that." So, Governor Ciarrocchi, what say you about that?
Well, the collective we have been talking about this for some time in a lot of different contexts, and that is we are so focused with testing these kids and testing these kids and testing these kids and then publishing scores like we're watching baseball box scores. And then when you attempt to question how the tests are being uh, uh, administered and what's going into the answers, you're not allowed to do that. Look, the reality is in some of the best school districts in the state, there are families that move here from the other side of the world and come here legitimately. And they arrive here from China or Vietnam and they do not speak English. It has been a situation in some of our most successful and affluent communities where at that end of the scale, superintendents and school board members have said it is unfair for a young girl to arrive here at 10 years old from China and 10 days later make her sit down, take the PSSAs. She can't read English and she can't speak it. She's going to fail and it's going to reflect poorly. So again, I think the grown-ups need to grow up and take a step back. It is perfectly reasonable whether the young child sitting there is because his parents work at a mushroom farm or because they came here on a visa and are living here because mom is a chemist, to say, if you're going to try and measure the success of a district, which is why we do this, you can't measure it if you're asking people who don't speak the language to take these tests. One. Two, if we don't roll up our sleeves and find out whether these boys and girls can actually speak and read English, and we don't treat them differently in a compassionate Christian way, dare I say, we're failing them. So again, the grown-ups need to understand and peel back. We take assessment tests to see if the school is succeeding so we can try in some way to measure how schools in Oxford measure up to those in Philadelphia. measure up to those Camp Hill, measure up to those Punxsutawney. We try, just like with SATs, they try. It's an imperfect way. So I think it is perfectly acceptable to ask, are the children taking the tests? Is English their primary language? And how long have they been here? That's perfectly acceptable. And I would think that educators would want to know that. And for the children that can't speak the language or read it, they need help. And then we can go measure the other kids who have been here and born in the United States and English is their primary language. Let's assess how they're doing. Again, there have been so many times in education where the last 2 years where I just wonder where the grown-ups are. I just wonder where the grown-ups are. Can I see the curriculum? No, you can't. Can we talk about what's being talked about in school? No, we can't. Can I ask why the Catholic kids are in school but ours are locked out? No, you can't. Can we separate the English speaking kids from the non-English speaking kids to assess their progress? No, you can't. That's we don't do that. I don't understand. So cooler heads prevail, common sense, and yes, let's measure and separate and assess. And then here's a novel idea, help the kids who don't speak English learn to speak English, and then we'll measure them a year later to see how they're progressing. And dare I say, Chris, this is not the first time in our nation. I am the grandchild of immigrants from Italy and Ireland and Germany. And my wife is the granddaughter of Polish immigrants. We've dealt with this before. It would be cruel to throw someone who arrived here from Italy and make them take an assessment test. I just don't understand. And I don't understand why she's casting. I don't know the woman. I don't know what's in her heart, but I know asking the question should not have resulted in scandal and the vapors because there she said these children don't speak English. Can't we remove them from the testing?
Karen has been patient here in the queue. Thank you, Karen. You've traveled all over the state, Guy, she says, in the last several months. What are voters telling you? What are their top concerns? And how will you address these concerns compared to others in the race? That's I bet I could guess. I think every candidate that I've interviewed probably says the same thing as the top concern, but I haven't asked you this yet, so that's a great question. What is the top concern? What are they telling you out there?
Um, Look, to me, they're intermingled. It's what the top concern is the economy. The top concern is the economy, the economy, and the economy. They're concerned about inflation. Despite what the White House said, inflation is real. Folks are concerned about empty store shelves. Despite what the White House says, there are empty store shelves. Despite what the White House says, the store shelves are not empty because the economy is so strong that we're all running out and buying things with this newfound money in our pocket. People notice that it costs more to heat their homes. People notice that it costs more to buy gasoline. People notice at work that some people aren't back at the office yet. People working in restaurants know that there's less people helping and staffing. So I would say the economy and everything that's an outgrowth from it, that there is now a level of fear and anxiety in the economy that I haven't seen in a long time. And I think we should all bear in mind on a human level that many people, particularly in small business, are now feeling this for 2 years, and uncertainty and an unease. The only reason I pause, Chris, is that the overarching issue is that this still has to do with bad policies and mandates and school closings. I mean, part of the reason people aren't back at work is because there's all sorts of mandates and protocols and lockdowns. Susie in accounting has COVID. Let's shut down the whole office for 2 weeks and we'll come back. We've learned nothing in 2 years. We close schools on a moment's notice. We close schools now when it snows. We now close schools if we think it's going to snow, because why not? They can just go home. We don't realize that 2 years later, mom and dad can't just stop going to work off, on, off, on, off, on like this. So what do I do differently? I say, one, every school in Pennsylvania is open. Every single school is open from now till the end of my 4 years and beyond. We are not closing. Two is it's time to go back to work. The Department of Labor will help you find work if your job is no longer there. The free lunch is over. You need to be looking for work. If you don't look for work, you don't get an unemployment check. And if you scam the system, you lose your unemployment for a year. We're going to be real serious about this. Can't ask people to keep contributing to an unemployment compensation system. that is paying people to stay home when they ought to be at work. So that's how I'm different. The last thing, as I've shared with you before on the show, I would just share with your listeners tonight, is everybody focuses on how different this state is, and we're rural and we're urban and we're this and we're that. Um, I've sat down with restaurant owners in South Philly. I've sat down with restaurant owners in Westchester, and I've sat down with restaurant owners in some of the tiniest towns, some of which your listeners may have never heard. It's all the same. The restaurant owners borrowed against their savings. They borrowed against their pensions. They took out second mortgages. They're tired. They're exhausted. They're fried. And they just want to know when their staff can come back and when they can stop paying twice as much for their supplies. And they want somebody to answer that. And that's what I've tried to be, the voice for small business, trying to bring back normalcy and get us back on stable footing.
I have I had one story in front of me today on the show, Guy, that I brought up, and it dovetails with a couple of weeks ago or a week ago. The Open Table people, the app for dinner reservations, said that in the last week of January 2022, compared to the last week in January 2029, Philadelphia, of 50 major cities, was something like 49th worst for changes in reservations using their app, meaning it had dropped something like, according to what, their metrics, people using their app in 2019, in that week, 2019 versus this year, it dropped some 60 something percent in terms of reservations. Couple that with this from the Inquirer just over the weekend. Philadelphia hotel occupancy plummeted nearly 60%. And still at this hour, the city of Philadelphia, which we'll get into the violence component in a minute, but you couple the violence with the fact that you still have to produce paperwork to even walk into the city anymore. I personally I've not been given the shot. I can't go to the Wells Fargo Center anymore. I can't have dinner in Philadelphia legally. Now, I don't know. Maybe there's a robust, humming economy in Philadelphia. I don't know, because I literally am not welcome to go there. But these things cannot be good. All of these things in their totality cannot be good for the city of Philadelphia.
No, look, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. Look, in the big picture, and to come back for Philly, in the big picture, what you're seeing on Open Table is the beginning of some other data, another of which is looking at taxes and who filed and what their income levels well, and how many filed a going out of business tax return, which you can do when you close your business. The numbers are gut wrenching. I mean, the numbers are gut wrenching for restaurants and hotels. The hotel nearest me in the Great Valley Corporate Center spent most of 2020 with an occupancy rate under 10%. There is no business model for that. There is no, you can bring in the brightest minds from Wharton. There is no business model that says, let's assume our occupancy is 8%. You can't survive. The same thing for restaurants. The same thing for restaurants of every shape and size. They were built, men and women sat down at a kitchen table or with their banker or their accountant or their partners and said, this is what we do. This is how many meals we're going to serve. This is how many times a night we're going to turn that table over. These are the meals we're going to serve. Imagine this combination. I keep reminding people everywhere. Imagine this. You were ordered closed. After you were ordered closed, you were slowly allowed to reopen. When allowed to reopen, you still weren't at 100% capacity. You're now at a point where your employees won't come back, and you're paying 30, 40, 50% more for supplies, and your restaurant still isn't full. You went into debt to get through 2020 and into 2021. It is now 2022. So that's a restaurant on the main line. That's a restaurant on the main line. Now go to Philadelphia, and go to Philadelphia where you tell your staff you take the percentage of staff who wanted to come back, and you have to tell some of them they're not allowed to come back because they didn't get vaccinated or wear their masks. And then you're kicking out certain customers like you. We don't need you here at McCormick and Schmick's because we'd sooner figure a way to tell you you're not welcome. So you take what is in many ways the hardest hit industry and is still rocked and crippled in hospitality, and you compound it by these insane rules that, Chris, you and I've talked about it on the show. I've talked about it a bunch of places. It's not just that the law's wrong, it defies common sense. It defies common sense, right? We all know the absurdity, Chris. You show up at the front door with your mask on in Philadelphia, and you mumble to the person at the maitre d's desk, and she mumbles back to you, and then they walk you 11 feet to your table, at which point you and your guest and your family take off your masks, eat, drink, and be merry for an hour and a half. And anybody that would have landed here from Jupiter would have said, God, you guys are insane. I mean, what was so special about walking that suddenly changed it? And so it's horrible. Add into that add into that that Philadelphia has had in the last 13 months nearly 1,000 carjacking and 600 murders. At the risk of sharing too much information, um, we don't go to eat in Center City, Philadelphia. My wife and I are not interested. I'm not interested in playing Russian roulette. And it's not because I think the server is going to give me COVID. I'm not parking my car 5 blocks from where I go and do it. So
And what
COVID,
does that mean, if I
lockdowns and
may,
that.
on that point? I'm
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt you on this,
yeah.
but what does that mean to a kid from South Philly? You love Philadelphia. I know you do. And so I've got to imagine that must bring you great pain as an adult who loves your town and grew up in this town to say you now won't even go into the city to dine with your wife.
Look, it's heartbreaking, and I've shared it. I was at a meeting in Philadelphia Saturday night, and I drove to what we could loosely say is sort of the border between Kensington and Port Richmond. Um, it looked like a third world nation. It looked like a third world nation. I parked my car because I had a space in front under a street lamp in front of where I was going. The street looked like something in a third world nation. It was covered in masks and trash and refuse and flyers. Um, the storefronts were largely closed and or shuttered. It looked like after a war. It breaks my heart. And I left the event without when I left the event, I left with two other men. And I looked at them and I said, forget politics, forget party. This is gut wrenching. There is filth lining this road. That store and that store are closed, and that one's boarded up. This is a third world country. It makes me sick. It would make me sick if you had dropped me into Baltimore, but to see the city I grew up in and to know I can't go in it. And look, you don't have to go to Wharton, right? This is not rocket science. If my neighbors on the main line are figuring a way to work because they can work from home and don't have to travel into Center City because of COVID or mandates or whatever, they're not going back. Add into that the crime, they're not going back to work. They're not buying coffee in the morning. They're not dropping off their dry cleaning. They're not getting their shoes shined. They're not going out to lunch. They're not going out to dinner. Add into the fear factor. I don't know how Philadelphia is going to survive. My understanding is they're still living off of the boatload, the aircraft carrier full of money we sent as COVID relief. And I think they're probably waiting for it again. It's a crime. It's heartbreaking. It is gut wrenching to walk into your old neighborhood and see it shut down. It is gut wrenching to look at the trash in the street. It is heartbreaking to go to Center City and see what was Wawa's flagship store sitting shuttered. What was Wawa's flagship store is gone. Uh, it, and to me,
And Wawa,
why
by
there
the
is
way,
not a Canadian, why is there not a Canada-like caravan of people in Philadelphia up and down Broad Street inviting us back, demanding police, demanding accountability and normalcy? I would join them in the parade. I don't know where the outrage is.
and Wawa would be uh, uncomfortable to say it aloud. What I know is true, and I've gone on national television to say, and I caught hell for saying it, oddly. People said, oh, you're making that up. Wawa never said this. Guy, for all the reasons you just stated, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. Now, they're a great corporate citizen here, and they love their town, and
Oh,
they're headquartered out just outside of Philadelphia, so they're never going to trash it. They're never going to speak ill. They can't politically for all kinds of reasons. But of course, that's why you pack up and don't operate Wawa in Center City anymore, for all those reasons. Of course, that's why.
well, and it's also, look, it's also that we have legalized theft in Philadelphia.
That's right.
We have legalized it. I had a group of neighbors that I knew from growing up held a neighborhood gathering for me in South Philly. And I sat there with women I knew from the 70s and 80s and 90s telling me that to go to Target, to go to the stores on Columbus Boulevard, and to see the open shoplifting and know that there is a policy in Philadelphia as clear as knowing you cannot run a red light, right? There is a policy that you can steal up to $700 without fear of being charged. And to watch people leave with shopping carts full of stuff as the security guards don't do anything because the death spiral has started. The security guards don't stop them because they're afraid. And the security guards don't call the police because if the police officers come, they've been hamstrung and told not to bother these people because they won't be prosecuted. The morale among our police officers is inexcusable. They've been left right. So why does Wawa leave? Because you can't. But Chris, as you may have seen in the media, I spent a day in West Philly. With the leader of what you would call a business group, with the gentleman Jabari Jones, who runs the West Philadelphia, for lack of a better word, the chamber, the West Philadelphia Development Organization. And I spent a day with him when we went place to place, including on blocks that were looted, where you can still see smoke and the fire damage from the adjoining places. These weren't Walmarts. These weren't Targets. These were family-owned beauty parlors and neighborhood catch-all stores where you could buy everything from hairnet to hairspray to a quart of milk that were burned out and looted. And somehow in somebody's crazy mind of justice, we let those stores burn down and those people couldn't come back. And the butchers and the grocery store, it's gut-wrenching. You can't, if you can go there and not be moved, I don't want to hang out with you.
All right, let me move to the next question here. And I know I'm sorry, I did not mean to trail off, although I have every reason to believe many of you wanted to talk about similar issues. So I don't think it was a wasted conversation. Monica says, what are your thoughts on reining in big tech with regard to the censorship that's currently occurring? You know, DeSantis has been interesting on this, Guy. He's the only governor. You know, you talk a lot about, I think, the federal government and what can Congress do, what might the president do, or the courts. What can governors do about or to big tech? I saw DeSantis was looking at maybe prosecuting or investigating or filing formal charges against, for instance, GoFundMe, who weren't going to give those Canadian truckers their $10 million. Does the governor have a place in that fight?
Well, first and foremost, the governor always has a place because the governor has a bully pulpit and should use it. You know, part of what I think has been missing as our liberties have been challenged and as the world has been turned upside down is some voices of reason and calm and some voices recognize that some people feel shut out. And they don't only feel shut out from Washington or Harrisburg, they feel shut out by social media. I mean, when the official press secretary, when Jen Psaki stands at the podium in the White House, under the seal of the White House, and talks about cooperating or collaborating with Facebook to work together to determine what Facebook is going to post in terms of health information, or what is permitted to be talked about in terms of violence or political protest, it ought to bring chills down the spine of everyone watching, because at that point, big government and big tech have become the same. They've become the same. So what can a governor do? One is never underestimate the bully pulpit, to shine the light on it, to bring it to light, to make sure that you watching it at home don't feel crazy and alone. Two is if they do business in Pennsylvania or harm a business or harm a citizen in Pennsylvania, there are things we can do in terms of investigation and oversight. If Facebook wants to promote businesses in Pennsylvania or harm businesses in Pennsylvania or promote people in Pennsylvania or harm them, we will find a way. We will find a way. Look, they've become hand in glove, right? As I've said, Facebook and Twitter and these other entities, they want the best of all worlds. They want to be free market until it's time not to be free market. And they want to be separate from government until it's time to be partnered with government. Not on my watch, not on my watch. And all of us both laugh and cry and scream as over the last year, things that we said in 2020 and 2021 and were told not to say and had our accounts canceled, blocked, or muted, to now only see them published by other people who are now very learned, is sickening.
Christina, hitting rewind a little bit on our conversation. I guess we didn't talk a lot about what can a governor do about the crime rate in Philadelphia? Does that fall on the mayor and the city council? Does a governor in Harrisburg say, look, Philadelphia is a cesspool, it's true, everything Guy said was true, but what can a governor do about Philadelphia?
Um, if the mayor and district attorney won't do the job, then the governor has to. For better or worse, I regret to inform everybody that Philadelphia is in fact in the city of Philadelphia, and the citizens of Philadelphia count as just as much as the citizens in Chester County or Jefferson County. Uh, the mayor of Philadelphia and the DA of Philadelphia have allowed Philadelphia to become one of the murder capitals in the nation and the violence capitals in the nation. So one, again, the bully pulpit, shame. If shame doesn't work, we tried a plan a year ago or 2 years ago, as you may recall. The Attorney General of Pennsylvania, who you may have heard of, is Josh Shapiro. He asked for the ability to step in and prosecute violent crimes in Philadelphia because the DA wasn't. The next murder charge that the Attorney General brings in Philadelphia will be the first. So the Commonwealth wants to give him another bat at the plate. They're going to give him that authority again. I have said this repeatedly. One, Larry Krasner ought to be impeached. One of my running mates is getting a lot of press for it, but I kindly reminded him that I had said that 27 days before he did. Larry Krasner ought to be removed. And I know it's very dangerous to talk about removing people from office because you disagree with him. It's not that I disagree with him, is that he has forfeited his job. The job is law enforcement has done. So one, bully pulpit. Two, if Larry Krasner and Josh Shapiro won't prosecute, I will go to the legislature, and I've said this standing in Pittsburgh. I will ask the legislature to appoint a special prosecutor to go into Philadelphia, and we will empower him or her with a staff and a team. We will prosecute crimes. I will not stand by and watch my neighbors and friends and the greatest, the largest city in our Commonwealth reduced to a shooting gallery. The third is we will support our police officers. And four, we will go back and shine the light. Chris, it's not really, it's hard, but it's not complicated, right? You support the police. This idea of holding cashless bail for violent crimes is insane. That you're allowed multiple violent crimes without being held is insane. And you prosecute. You arrest, you prosecute, and you totally remove from everybody's mindset this idea that there are such things as petty theft. The folks on Lansdowne Avenue in West Philly, the shops on Passyunk Avenue, the shops on Allegheny Avenue in Port Richmond, there is no such thing as a petty theft. They cannot tolerate $50 a day in theft. That is not petty to them. It is not petty to a Korean grocer to lose $80 in produce. That is not a petty theft. It is their livelihood. It is what they do for a living. So we end this insanity. Look, Rudy Giuliani did it 30 years ago. Ed Rendell did it 30 years ago. You support the police, you prosecute crimes, and there is no tolerance for crime, period. I will do it. If Larry Krasner and Josh Shapiro won't, I will get a special prosecutor and we'll do it. The police officers want to do it. I will lift their morale and I will have their backs. We will fight crime. Philadelphia counts too. There is no safe place for criminals. This insanity ends.
We'll go rapid fire here as we come in on an hour. I'll try to keep this to an hour because I know, Guy, your throat is probably done for here soon. So we'll try to ask as many as we can, and we'll start with Sean here. Guy, thank you for running. What practically would you do to try to pass legislation to change education funding, school options? I know your passion for that. Control spending on things like pensions. I know charter schools are your passion, but my concern is the growth of entitlements, yet still attracting good teachers into the education field. It's a good one from Sean. And maybe a complex one. I don't know how quick you can answer that, but give it a whirl.
Hi, Sean. So let's see. We'll try and do it. So step one is why am I so passionate about school choice? I'm passionate about school choice because parents ought to be in charge. And the last 2 years, we saw parents shoved out of school board meetings and tried to be pushed away. So I'm so passionate for school choice because I've believed it for decades. I did help pass the charter law. I did help pass the education tax credit. I did help parents learn how to use it. I did help charter schools open. But it's not because these are neat concepts or I enjoy tinkering with education. It's because parents ought to be in charge. So I will work with the legislature to pass the broadest, most comprehensive school choice bill this Commonwealth has ever seen to save as many kids and empower as many parents. One. Two, there's a rescue mission. Without going into details in the interest of time, there are 55,000 kids on waiting lists for charter schools. There are 40,000 kids on waiting lists for scholarships, where their parents applied for scholarships because they're low-income families. So what do we know? We know there's nearly 100,000 kids whose parents would like them to be somewhere else. Year one, that's the rescue mission. I've said it privately. I'll say it. I'll say it with your audience. I will not sign the first budget if we do not have a plan to rescue those 100,000 kids. We need to lift the lid on charter schools, and we need to increase spending. While we're working to give school choice to every parent, we're going to do that. Next is we have accountability. There are schools in Pennsylvania that are abject failures. The one I talk about all the time for listeners in Philadelphia is Strawberry Mansion. Strawberry Mansion High School should have 2,000 students. It currently has 186. Every parent or grandparent or guardian that's in charge of a high school age child in Strawberry Mansion has moved heaven and earth to get that kid somewhere else. There are 186 left. Let's go rescue them. And that's what I call it, a rescue mission. So we need school choice because parents should be in charge. We need school choice because we need more good options, and we need it as a rescue mission for those kids. I'll move heaven and earth. And that's how we deal with the funding issue. See, parents are in charge. Charter schools spend 70 cents on the dollar of what a traditional public school spends, and private and some parochial schools spend half of what the public school system spends. It's not about money. It's about accountability, about being kid focused. If you sense I care about this, you're right.
Willie, this is
Yes.
interesting from the New York Post. I had this in front of me today and I didn't get to it, although we will talk about it tomorrow. 16 Penn swimmers say this biological male that now calls himself a female. 16 of the women that swim alongside this person say this person should be barred from competition. And Willie wants to know, as governor, could you see yourself doing what we know Kristi Noem just recently did, and a few other governors around the country have forbidden biological males from competing in women's sports?
Yeah. So I want to make sure that we limit it or eliminate it in the government run programs, particularly in those things where medals are awarded and scholarships are at stake. I mean, we can't have the insanity of someone doing this and ruining scholarship dreams. Um, so yes, I would do that. The only thing I would say that is different, again, is the local Little League, the local YMCA. Let's let that community handle it and do it in that sort of situation. We all don't need as 13 million Pennsylvanians to crawl into the Red Lion Little League and find out why a young boy or a young girl is allowed to play a different sport. It's none of our business. But when it gets to the school district run and we get into PIAA and we're giving awards and we're offering scholarships, that's a different story, and we're not going to tolerate and do that in those settings, in those forums.
Lisa wants to know, Guy, she says, as governor, what would you do about the Keystone Pipeline situation and bringing back jobs? It's the thing that national politicians love to talk about every 4 years. I joke because
Yeah.
it's almost knee jerk. It's I don't know. I'm trying to think of what it is. It's like going to Detroit and talking about cars. You come to Pennsylvania and you talk about energy. Everybody does. We all understand it.
Yep.
But you really do. I mean, out west. I talk about my friend in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. That I mean, there are people out there making real money, or were anyway, tied to these jobs in things like cracker plants and fracking. It's amazing the money that's come in to some communities that saw none. I mean, real jobs, real money.
Look, you're right. If this was one of the debates, for those of you who've watched, this would be yet another time where I'd hold up one of my pictures, and I would show you one of several pictures at this point. Lackawanna College, with their branch campus in Wyoming County, that trains men and women to go out and work on the well pads or the supporting industries, that has a near 100% placement rate. What does this mean? What does this whole industry mean with money? What it means is that Lackawanna College has a program in Tunkhannock, Pennsylvania, that if you participate in and graduate, you have a near 100% chance of finding a meaningful job. That's what it means. Uh, what else it means is that we can be the leading state in the nation in terms of energy. We can produce more gas than Texas. We have more BTUs under the ground than every nation on the planet. I didn't say state, every nation on the planet except Saudi Arabia. The pipeline connecting southwestern Pennsylvania to Delaware County is 99% finished. We need to get it done. We need to do it right. We need to put safeguards. I live in the county where it's been broken, where we've had leaks, where we've had screw ups. We need to fix it. But because we've had leaks and screw ups doesn't mean, oh, well, never mind. It was a $5 billion project that will provide thousands of jobs for generations. We're smart people. We have engineers. We know how to build bridges and skyscrapers. We can build this pipeline safely. It needs to be built. And what it does mean around the state, Chris, I say only half kidding sometimes to folks. Pennsylvania's economy has been generally good in greater Philadelphia, but for inner city Philadelphia. It's been generally good in the Lehigh Valley. Pittsburgh's reinvented itself. We have struggled along the New York and Ohio and West Virginia borders. Where is the gas? The gas is along the New York, the Ohio, and the West Virginia borders. The only debate we're having is whether there is enough there for 100 years or 200 years, depending on the technology we can uncover and how much of it we can share with our European allies. Chemical jobs, fracking jobs, manufacturing jobs, billions of dollars for people. It is unlimited potential. I've said it before, and you're about to see it in a couple days. Spoiler alert, in Broad and Liberty. We are morally bound to get it out of the ground and into the marketplace. It will change this state from Ohio to New Jersey.
Speaking of bridges, you mentioned we're good at building bridges. One collapsed in Pittsburgh on the very day that Biden came to Pittsburgh to tout infrastructure improvements. Now, we have some of, if not the highest gasoline taxes in the nation in Pennsylvania, and bridges are falling. And ostensibly, that money, a lot of toll money, bridge money, gas tax money, was supposed to go to fixing these things. Turns out that was a state-maintained bridge, as I understand it. So what of that? How do you speak to that if you're Governor Ciarrocchi?
Yeah. Our gas tax, our gas prices are the highest this side of the Rocky Mountains. We have the highest gas tax in the nation, and our roads are generally rated in the 30s or 40s among the 50 states in terms of quality. So you don't have to be a Republican or a conservative to step back and say something doesn't work there. Why are we paying the most and have the lowest? So what do you do about it? One is we need a full audit to understand exactly where's this money going, because it's clearly not going to roads. We do know one problem. The gang in Harrisburg decided to play shell games years ago, and we pay for our state police out of the gas tax because it was a nifty way of trying to pretend the budget wasn't growing as fast as it was going. So that's terrific. That's like taking your mortgage money and taking some of it and paying for your car, and then say, gee, I don't have any money for the mortgage. Part of the reason in Pennsylvania we don't have money is because we're doing that. Now, again, let me be clear. We should have state police officers. They should have tools and training and all that they need, but we should pay for it out of the budget. So step one is we need to audit, figure out where the heck it's going, because sure as hell, I'm not going to ask Pennsylvanians to pay more, to pay higher tolls or higher taxes on this. So one, we need to figure out where it's going. Two, there needs to be a sense of accountability in terms of these roads and bridges. Third is we are getting an aircraft carrier full of money, courtesy of the National Infrastructure Bill, and we need to have a triage plan of taking care of those roads and bridges and overpasses that are in damage, are in danger of running down. But I think it begins with an audit of the turnpike, an audit of PennDOT, to figure out what in the hell's going on, because it is a universal problem. Look, we're an old state. We are the Keystone State. We get tons of traffic because people are trying to get to New England, the Midwest, and the South. But let's figure it out. Maryland's roads aren't falling apart. New York's roads aren't falling apart. You talk to truckers, and I can't believe I'm saying this. If you talk to truckers, they tell you, they can tell you blindfolded when they've hit New York State. The quality of the roads is exponentially better. I didn't think New York did anything better than us. and they do. Begins with an audit, but it begins also with a pledge of saying, hell no, we're not raising taxes or fees here. We've more than enough money to figure this problem out here.
Loretta, small businesses are struggling. What needs to be done so they have a level playing field to succeed? This is your wheelhouse. You deal with a lot of small and mid-sized businesses as a chamber president. Is there something that a governor can do right away to help bolster, back up small business?
Yeah. So there's a few, and as I've shared before, 800 members in our chamber. When the lockdowns happened in Chester County, we have name brands like Vanguard and QVC. Vanguard and QVC never called me and cried and said, "What do we do?" They knew how to figure it out. The people were the restaurants, the antique shops, the karate studios, the barber shops. So what do we do for them? One is, as we discussed earlier, one is schools stay open. Mom and dad do not have to worry anymore. One, we pledge that schools are open. Two, we tell everybody it's time to go back to work. We stop paying people not to work. Do you realize our unemployment rate in Pennsylvania is 1.6% worse than the national average? That's just a bunch of numbers. What does it mean? You know what it means is if we were just average, we'd have 97,000 more people working. 97,000. How do you help small business? You get those people back to work. And I've been really clear all along. Let's put aside the people who have illnesses or reasons they can't go back to work. That's a special category. I have no beef with those people. But for everybody else, it's time to go back to work. The two best things we can do in the short term for small business is one, make sure schools stay open. Two, make sure that we tell everybody it's time to go back to work and the free ride is over. Three is we make sure we have reasonable standards and common sense standards at daycares and preschools, and we don't shut them down when we're dealing with 3-year-olds under silly rules. So again, people can go back to work. And last but not least, there was supposed to be aid targeted to these businesses that many times didn't make it to them. And I want to go back and figure out, Lord knows, I hope by next January, restaurants and dry cleaners and caterers and barbershops don't need help. But if they need help, they will. But I'll tell you, Chris, when you talk to them, they don't want aid. That's a last resort. They take it with deep frustration. They want it. They want to make this on their own. So look, if we have to help them because government crippled them, then we'll help them. But we can help them through some common sense measures, including telling people it's time to go back to work. And look, and if the overall economy opens up, people will go back to restaurants and they'll go and get their hair cut and they'll walk down Main Street and they'll go back to shopping centers, and that increases foot traffic, which will help all of us.
I'll close with this question from Wendy. I think it's more of a philosophical one, maybe, than anything. How are you equipped to fight against leftists who are constantly fighting against an America First agenda? They fight dirty. They openly defy law. They and as opposed to giving up on the Trump agenda, would you give up on it? And as you suggested, the Supreme Court seems to not be upholding the law along with DAs. What's your plan to uphold the Constitution, ensure our freedoms and rights? This is I guess the name Trump hasn't come up in our conversation yet, but there is a sense that the guy, for whatever anybody thinks of him, fought tirelessly, unapologetically, and constantly against entities that were. I mean, we've seen it with what's going on with Joe Rogan. It's a column that I'm thinking about writing this week. There's just this constant assault against good, decent people who don't mean anybody harm. Masked children, guys with a podcast, parents showing up at school boards. It just feels like an all-out assault on just good, decent people just minding their own business. And a guy like Trump, Guy, as you know, was warts and all, constantly waging battles. And some, even on our side, said, "Oh, I wish he wouldn't always get into fight." So people like Wendy, I suspect, I'm speaking for her, I'm guessing, hunger for someone who's unapologetically and consistently in the fight would be my guess, if I could just boil that down to its essence. So do you feel you have that in you? Or is that who you are?
If I haven't convinced you over the last hour, I don't know. Wendy, I think if you've listened to the show over the last several years, if you've listened to me in the debates, if you've read what I've written, if you've listened to my radio interviews, if you've listened to my podcast, I think you see at my core I'm a fighter. But more importantly, as somebody that didn't wake up one day and decide to be conservative. I didn't wake up one day and decide to be outraged because it was cool. I was outraged because I was a dad and I saw what was happening to kids. I was outraged because I ran a chamber and I saw that businesses were crushed. You know, for years, Republicans said Democrats are just interested in power. They're just interested in big government. They're not interested in people. And then we watched it, our worst fears, worse than anything Ronald Reagan could have ever imagined. The United States of America literally picked winners and losers. We told you who could go to work here in Pennsylvania and who couldn't. We ordered people not to work. We told people not to go hug their grandparents. I mean, go back and read what they said. They told you not to visit. They're the heartbreaking pictures of grandkids standing on sidewalks, holding up signs because the government said don't let them go inside. So I did fight. I fought against Tom Wolf. I don't have a beef with Tom. I don't know Tom Wolf. What I know is that he has been a totally ineffective, out of touch, arrogant governor. And I promise you that it's not me. And I will fight tooth and nail, not only to win, but to make sure the next governor doesn't resemble him. As I said, Wendy, look, I've been doing this my whole life. I fought for school choice. I fought for charter schools. I went to my first March for Life in 1997, long before I ever thought about running for anything. I worked for those issues. I worked for them because I cared. I walked on my first well pad in 2011. When I became president of the Chester County Chamber in 2014, I took my board of directors to Susquehanna County, so close to New York we could have sneezed in it, so they could see well pads. My passion for energy is not because I'm running for governor. My passion for pro-life is not because I'm running for governor. My passion for charter schools is not because I'm asking for your vote or because I think it sounds cool. I'm a fighter. And how do you fight? How do you fight effectively? You fight because you believe and you know you're right and you know the stakes are that high. And I've listened to a lifetime of politicians come along and say, this election is critical. Well, this election is critical. Josh Shapiro is Tom Wolf with energy and arrogance and money. Tom Wolf was nothing compared to what Josh Shapiro is. As I said, send a kid from South Philly, somebody that's been fighting for conservative issues in the trenches, on radio shows, on TV shows, in print, in town halls, from South Philly to West Philly to Punxsutawney. I'm up to the battle because I'm used to fighting, but I'm up to the battle because I believe it here. I can spout off all the statistics here in my head, but I believe it in my heart. And that's what motivates me to run, because I know that we're right and they're wrong. And I know we have to fix it. And I'll close with that. We have to fix this for our kids. Our kids need to know that the United States of America is about liberty and opportunity and individuals having the opportunity to succeed. And it's not about government handouts or government mandates. So I believe it with every fiber of my being, and that's why I'm running for office, because we have to set the world back the way it's supposed to be. I can't change the world. I can't change the United States. But if given the opportunity, I will change Pennsylvania. And you'll have somebody in the governor's mansion that's on your side as an ally, never ridiculing you, but fighting alongside with you.
If you would like to donate to his campaign, if you'd like to volunteer, reach out, learn more. Guy4Gov. That's the website right here. Guy4Gov.com. And thank you for never, ever making us spell Ciarrocchi. That is the question I get more than anything else when you come on a show is, how do you spell Ciarrocchi? And I say, thankfully, we don't have to. It's Guy4Gov.com.
Yeah, that was brilliant marketing 101. And I appreciate the help and support. You can follow us on social media, and you'll see all sorts of tweets and updates. And on Facebook, a little more substance. And you can see my columns at Broad and Liberty. I have been writing for some time about everything from freedom to capitalism to energy to school choice to big government. It's all there, and you can see it at Guy4Gov. Look, let me just say this. There are 15 of us. I think when the dust settles, there'll be 8 of us. Some are better known. No one has fought longer. No one has fought harder. And no one else was out front first on the issue of liberty and mandates and freedom. There's some good people. There's some people that are running that, I'll leave for you to decide with their records. But nobody's been fighting as long and hard as I have been. Nobody's been fighting as passionately as I have been. Nobody's been as out front as much. Look, I hate coming on here and saying this, I. But I understand that you're looking for a fighter. And I can just tell you, look at my record. As they say, Google me. Go back and see decades of columns and radio interviews and newspaper interviews. I didn't do this because I was running for governor. I'm running for governor because I believe all of those things, and we need to set them right.
And we will undoubtedly hear Guy's voice again on the show, which we do 6 to 9 every single morning on Philadelphia's AM 990 The Answer, which I'm doing tomorrow morning. So, Mr. Ciarrocchi, thank you. GuyForGov.com is the website. Thanks for all the questions. We do this every Monday until primary day with a couple of holidays off. It's Meet the Candidates. This is night number 2. Thank you, Mr. Ciarrocchi. And we will see you tomorrow morning on the radio on Philadelphia's AM 990 The Answer. Good night.